We're here, we're queer, and we love the Lord. That's right, you're listening to Coming Out Christian, a podcast about life at the intersection of queer identity and Christian faith. This fun, faithful, and sometimes irreverent podcast is a production of Love Boldly, an Ohio-based nonprofit creating spaces where LGBTQIA+ people can flourish in Christianity. I'm one of your hosts, Siobhan Boyd Nelson, and my co-host is the Reverend Dr. Ben Hillscamp, Executive Director of Love Boldly. So join us, and let's find out who's coming out today. Well, hello there, Ben.
Hello, Siobhan. How are you?
I am doing very well. It's great to see you on this beautiful Thursday morning. Well, afternoon, I suppose.
I was about to say that. It's 2:30 in the afternoon, but whatever works.
Whatever works. I'm just excited. I've had a very energetic day. I will say energetic day. A day that usually I would expect on a Monday and not usually this energetic late in the week. How does your energy usually go?
Yeah, mine usually declines. I'm very much a Monday morning, get up early kind of person, or at least I used to be. But no, I usually have less energy, and I definitely have less energy today. And this gray, cloudy, gloomy, rainy, slightly cold day isn't helping any.
Ben, these are the autumn days I've been telling you about as we've been talking about the changing of the seasons. This is the day I was warning you about.
Yep, definitely. I mean, this is kind of like winter when I like winter, except when it snows.
Okay. So the winter you like is the winter that is autumn?
Yeah, more or less. I like the crisp days when it's not raining or it's not snowing, or it's raining or snowing and I don't actually have to go outside.
Those are the best days. Snowy days when there's nothing that you actually have to go outside for are the best days. You have to get a little strategic up here in the Midwest, though. You have to kind of keep your eye on the forecast, do your grocery shopping, run all your errands.
Yep.
Otherwise, you might get caught out there.
Yep.
Yeah.
And of course, we're in the Midwest where we know what to do with snow, ice, rain, etc., but we don't always like when I lived in Vermont, you would have a snowstorm or an ice storm, and within an hour of it stopping or an hour of daylight, everyone in the community would have come together to scrape all the sidewalks off and make paths and do all that. No offense to the Midwest, but we don't, at least not here in Ohio, do we tend to really do that. So we have the snow and we know what to do with it, but we're not exactly into the whole like helping our neighbors out thing, except in small areas.
Oh, I hear you. Yeah, I hear you. I think I'm more into helping my neighbors out with a snowblower.
Yep.
It's easier. I mean, shoveling, and it gets harder as you get older, right? Because shoveling uses all those joints, your hips, your knees. You got to bend with your knees. I'm probably not the only person who's hurt my back shoveling before, or ended up with snow in my hair if you were trying to shovel while the wind was still blowing.
Yes.
I don't know if you've had that experience of throwing a giant shovel of snow in the air that it flies back in your face.
Yep, totally.
Yeah. And so that'll kind of shut down your neighborliness, right? Like that snow in your face is going to shut down the neighborliness right there.
Totally.
Zip it up.
Totally.
Yep. But we can, I think this is a great maybe reminder that not all of our neighbors have the knees and the back and the hips to do the shoveling. So if you do want to shovel, maybe not the whole walk, you can just shovel a couple feet extra. A couple feet goes a long way.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that was our good deed for the day, Ben, I think. Are you ready to get into today's guest?
Very excited.
Well, I'm incredibly excited, Ben, and I think you know why. Because I know today's guest very, very well, but so I'm going to do a lot of listening. If folks are used to hearing me ask a lot of questions, I'm going to let Ben take a little bit of the lead today and do a lot of listening. And then, of course, I'll jump in because I can't help myself. But anyway, our amazing guest today is Maritza Shay Nelson, who just happens to be my wife. Prior to starting their own law firm, Maritza Shay Nelson spent 7 years at two of the nation's largest law firms as an associate in their respective litigation groups. Then Shay decided that practicing law could be about more than how many hours could be billed, and now works almost exclusively on a flat fee basis, helping entrepreneurs, founders, dreamers, and innovators pursue their passion without worrying about that legal stuff might come back to bite them. Clients range from startups to growing businesses and nonprofits with nearly 100 employees across a wide variety of industries. Maritza is a proud graduate of Howard University, and we did just get back from Howard University homecoming, so HU. Where they received their Bachelor of Arts in Political Science, summa cum laude, before going on to the University of Texas School of Law for their Juris Doctorate. In their spare time, they do give back to the community. They have been on the advisory board of the Reeb Center, have been a volunteer at Kaleidoscope Youth Center, and are in a leadership position, a vice president of something, at the National Association of Women Business Owners Columbus chapter. And then in their spare time, they are a struggling blues rock guitar and bass player, an avid sci-fi and fantasy reader. And Shay has been married to their better half, that's me, and best friend, for 15 years. They have one mostly adult son, a very goofy Boston Terrier French Bulldog mix, and a saltwater reef aquarium. It's a giant water box, and we love to stare at it. Welcome, Shay.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome, Shay, to your own office, which is where I record the podcast, in Shay's office. So, Shay, welcome to your space.
Hey, I'm glad I get to hang out in my office a little bit.
You do. But you are, a special guest, but we're still going to start out the same way we start out every episode, every interview on Coming Out Christian, and that is with our question, what is your testimony? What is your story at the intersection of queer identity and Christian faith?
So I think it is a bit of a winding story, but I'll start with the end, which is, despite the crazy things that I've seen and despite some of the silliness that's happened at the intersection of being queer and Christian, I'm still here. I still have my faith. I have not lost it, and I have not let anybody take that away from me. So I guess to kind of go back to the beginning, I had a really interesting upbringing in that I grew up in Louisiana. My mom's side of the family is from South Louisiana, and so that naturally means that everybody on that side of the family is Catholic. My dad's side of the family, however, is more northern Louisiana and was more your typical Black Southern Baptist. And so when my parents got married, like any good Catholic, my mom insisted that, they had to agree to raise the kids in the Catholic Church because that's just part of church teaching, right? If you're going to marry somebody outside the faith, you have to get, if you're going to get married in the church, you have to agree to that. So my dad agreed, and we were mostly raised Catholic. I was baptized and confirmed in the Catholic Church. But that was like kind of the 9 months, the school year. And then during the summers, we would go spend the summer with my grandparents on my dad's side of the family. And Granny didn't care how you were being raised. Everybody at the house during the summer was going to church. And if we were there the right week, we were going to vacation Bible school with the rest of the cousins and everything else. So it was kind of this odd mix of like, you're very chill, quiet, very structured Catholic mass, right? And very, Sunday school in the Catholic Church is like 45 minutes between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. mass, right? Versus going to church with my grandparents during the summer, and it's like loud and shouting. I mean, maybe not as much as like the Pentecostal church you grew up in, but, just much louder, much more energetic, taking much longer than 45 minutes for mass, right? So all of these things, and it was this weird juxtaposition of, okay, on the one hand, I feel like, the Catholic Church is like, no, we're right, everybody else is wrong. The Baptist Church is like, no, we're right, everyone else is wrong. And at the end of the day, as a little kid, I just remember coming to the very distinct conclusion that, okay, you can't really convince me that one half of the family is going to hell because they're in the wrong denomination. Like, that doesn't make sense. God can't be that petty. Right. So that was kind of like my probably earliest, most formative belief about faith was like, God is not that petty. Like, there has to be something deeper and more important going on here. Like, even though those are very two different styles of worship, two different ways of having a church service. Yeah, it can't be that, oh, okay, you grew up in the wrong family, so sorry about your luck, you're wrong. Maybe you'll come across something different and end up on the right path. So that was kind of like the early, most formative thing that I can remember about my faith. What was really interesting, I think, was the fact that, at least growing up in Louisiana, and I grew up in Shreveport, which as a kid was probably like 100,000 people, right? I mean, it doubled in size after Hurricane Katrina because we got a lot of folks coming up from New Orleans. But, it wasn't a super tiny town, but it wasn't a big city either. And so I think what was really interesting was I don't remember hearing a lot of like the church doing like anti-gay things. Like I don't remember it being something that people talked about. Like it was more like it just doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, I hear a lot, listening to some of the other episodes of the podcast, you hear a lot of people talk about, feeling very much condemned as a child and things like that. And I think I was really lucky that I didn't have that experience. I was a tomboy my entire life. Like there's a page in my baby book that my parents kept for me. From the time I was like 2, if you tried to put me into a skirt, I would just have a complete meltdown, right? So
that tracks.
What you see is what you get, right? I've been a tomboy my entire life. I've learned, kind of after the fact that everybody in the family knew that I was gay. Like it was not going to be a surprise whatsoever when I came out.
But who was it a surprise to?
Well, it was a surprise to me. Like I had no idea just because I didn't have any conception of gay people. Like I knew I was different. I knew I was a tomboy, right? But that was, and it just kind of is what it was. And so I didn't hear a lot of, I didn't really remember anything about the church talking about it. It wasn't really a subject in the family. It was just kind of this sort of, I don't want to say don't ask, don't tell, but it almost felt like it just didn't exist.
Yeah.
So, I say all that to say, eventually later on, I think by the time I was in high school, my mom and one of my aunts had a gay friend. I have no idea where they found this person at, how they got friends with this person.
If you knew her mom and her aunts, you would understand that statement. Yeah, like where in their lives did they come across? Like where did their paths intersect?
Right. I mean, these are two like very straight-laced, good Southern Catholics, right? And then here comes this sort of like very flamboyant gay man. And like that was my first real like, oh, okay, yeah, they're gay people, right? But again, it was a gay man, super flamboyant, was going through a lot of health issues, the HIV and things like that back in the day, right? And so it was just like, I had no idea where they'd come across this person, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was like, oh, okay, they got that one friend, whatever, right?
And still no relation to you.
Didn't dawn on me whatsoever.
Yes.
Like didn't click at all. I mean, literally, like I grew up in such a bubble. Like there would be rumors about people as like, oh, that guy, he's a little out there, right? Or, oh, like I remember the family, I remember hearing things like, oh, you'll grow out of being the tomboy one day. Everybody grows out of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I was really lucky in that my mom didn't try to force it too much, right? Because I think I would have had a lot harder time if she really fought me on that. So that was kind of like the first, like, sort of like, oh, there are gay people out there, right? And then fast forward a little bit, and, the Catholic Church went through the whole child abuse scandal.
Yeah.
And I think that was when I probably not first, but I think that was sort of like the icing on the cake of like, not really, I don't want to say satisfied with the Catholic Church, but I was getting to that point, like, especially as confirmation was approaching, it's probably like 12, 13, around that age. And it's like, I've got questions. The Catholic Church doesn't really encourage you to ask questions, let alone kind of give straight answers. And then, you start throwing in this sex scandal on top of it. And it's like, oh, wait, and they're covering up for pedophiles? Like, so it's like I went through confirmation because I had my faith, right? I didn't have an issue with that. But I was definitely having questions about the church itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to a point where I was like, people always say like, where two or more are gathered, right? You know, and my experience was where two or more gathered, it seems like we get corruption and scandals.
Okay.
So I'll be good with my faith over here, right? I'll pray and I'll do those things, and I can do that. But the church, like organized religion, ew, I don't know about that.
Mm-hmm.
So, skip ahead a little bit and got to college and really started to see that, oh, gay people do exist. And
Oh.
no wonder everyone thinks that I'm also gay. Like, newsflash, right? Just a really, it's weird to come out and it'd be a surprise to yourself, right? I tried for the longest to sort of like play along, get along, fit in. I called myself trying to date people. It was
Y'all, it was funny. I'm going to jump in now, just as someone who was there. So Shay and I met in the year 2000. So we've legitimately known each other since September of 2000, 25 years now. And I met them when they were a freshman on campus. And so, like, I know these people that Shay dated, and I know what dating looked like for Shay. And dating looked like hanging out with your guy friend playing video games.
Yeah, playing Madden or college football on the Xbox. Like,
Right.
That's what, like, looking back on it, it should have been obvious.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Like, straight blinders on, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, tried to play along and do all that stuff for a while. And fortunately had good friends that were like, why don't you come hang out with us? And why don't you come check out this party? And perhaps this is more your speed. Like, so that certainly helped. But got to a point where, okay, so fast forward a little bit, I start coming out to the family, and all of a sudden I'm getting these like weird reactions. Like,
Oh, you thought they were weird.
well, I thought they were weird, right?
Okay,
Like,
yeah.
oh, we don't believe in that. We don't do that. Like, oh, I thought I had a daughter. Now I've got this, right? And it's just like, where is this even coming from? Like, I've seen you with a gay friend. Nobody's ever said anything about being gay or not being gay. Like, why is this and then I start hearing all the stories in the family of like, well, everyone knew, like, we were just waiting on you to tell us. But at the same time, there was still that sort of surprise and taken aback, like, oh, how could you?
Mhm.
Which really just surprised me. I was like, I can't even believe we're having this conversation. Like,
Because no one had ever explicitly said being gay is bad that you
Right.
remember.
right.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden it was this sort of like, we don't believe in that. That's not how you were raised. And it's like, am I misremembering? Like, did I skip a few Sundays? Like, what happened here?
Yeah.
So that was really odd. And it was also odd in the context of, my parents going through a divorce. And I guess for the sake of being polite, I won't get into too many of the details, but there were some
Complications.
complications, some moral failures, right? That it was just like, wow, like everybody's concerned about me being gay, and like you guys have been like hiding this under the rug and fighting about it for like the better part of probably 2 decades. So that also threw me for a loop, right? And so again, it's this juxtaposition of like people want to have the sort of moral high ground about being gay over here, but then, when straight marriages are falling apart for adultery or cheating or whatever else is going on in the marriage, and it's just like, well, that's just what happens. It's like you hear that statistic about the divorce rate being 50%, right?
Right.
And it's like, why are you worried about gay marriage? Like, go take care of your own marriage. So you kind of had all of that going on, and again, the issues with organized religion. But again, to fast forward just a little bit, 2010, we got married.
We did.
And
there were no moms
there were no moms
at that time because of reactions. So we kind of went, it was kind of 50-50 for both of us. Both of our dads, I wouldn't even say begrudgingly, but for both of our fathers, we were too much of their children for them to not be there and be part of this moment in our lives. And for both of our moms, it was not a step that they could take. So both dads were there and neither of the moms as part of that process. Yeah.
Yeah, which again, like my dad, when I first told my dad that I had proposed, his initial reaction was like, oh, whoa, we don't believe that. Like, whoa, hold on. All right. And very quickly got off the phone. And so, but he kind of had to have like that meltdown for like 30 seconds and then called me back. I forget if it was the same day or the next day, and completely changed his tune. So it was like, for our dads, it was a very quick, like, I don't know if this is what I wanted for my kid, but okay. Right. And for our moms, it's taken
about 10 years,
20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. 10 years, to kind of
15, sorry.
Yeah. 15 years now. Yeah. To kind of come back around. But some point early in our marriage, I forget what year this was, woke up one day and Siobhan said, yeah, there's this church I want to check out. You don't have to come with me, but I'm going to go.
As your wife does one random Sunday morning.
And at that point, I don't think we'd even had a lot of conversations about faith and religion in the church. I don't even think I knew that you were even interested in looking for a church.
No, and I think, and that's because of a lot of my church trauma, as I've talked about in the past. And I think the furthest we had gotten in faith conversations was me making fun of your prison tat, which is, again, me making fun of. That's right, Ben. Laugh. It's not a prison tat. They have a tattoo, and it's just on their bicep, and so I call it their prison tat. But it's a cross. And what does it say?
It's a cross with the praying hands and the rosary, and above it is a reference to Proverbs 3. I want to say verses 5 and 6.
Mm-hmm.
So about the time my grandfather passed, about the time that the church was going through the whole child pedophile scandal, right, and me kind of like having these frustrations with organized religion, what I said to myself was, okay, like, what is the core of my faith, right? Because I have my faith, like, I do believe in God, right? Absolutely. It's the church I have an issue with, right? And so for me, that core has always been trust in the Lord with thine own heart, and lean not into thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths.
Yep.
And so that summed it up for me. And so that became that tattoo that my wife likes to call a prison tat, because I guess a lot of prisoners have the
praying
cross and
hands.
praying
Yeah, and the cross and the praying hands. But that was essentially the furthest our kind of faith conversations had gone up until that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had heard about this church as part of the UCC. You had heard, from, I guess, a mutual friend of ours
Who was Black and gay.
Yeah, Black and gay, that this church was different,
Mhm.
right? Now it's interesting because if you listen to previous episodes, you know that Siobhan grew up very apostolic Pentecostal.
Yes.
And I grew up like 75% Catholic with this dash of Baptist, right? That's why that's so important. So for me, going to church was, you don't have to hoop and holler for God to hear you, right? Like, all seeing and all knowing, he will hear you even if you just whisper.
Yeah.
And for Siobhan, it was like, no, we need to feel the Spirit moving through the building.
Because
right?
I feel it.
So the idea of us even finding a church where we would both be comfortable just sounded impossible. Yeah. But she'd heard about this church from a mutual friend who was like, no, this is different. The pastor had come from apostolic?
Assemblies of God.
Assemblies of God, right? Mm-hmm. And so had a bit of that, we're going to be led by the Spirit, but then it done a whole kind of thing around, like, I guess the way I'd heard the story was that he had been hosting sort of debates about being gay in the church.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily giving an opinion, but just hosting the debates, right? And word got back to the Assemblies of God. They kick him out of the congregation. And so he had, joined the UCC, rebranded the church, and it become completely open and affirming. And one of the first things we had heard, and what really impressed us initially, was that this was a person that was super academic.
Yes.
Right? Like, university professor, knew all the arguments back and forth about, every argument you could have about gay in the Bible, right? He knew it all. And so we attended that first Sunday, and we were both very impressed because it was a church where you were going to get deep explanations, where you were encouraged to ask questions, but then also, like, people like Siobhan could lift their hands, right, and sing out loud. And those of us who grew up in a more quieter church were kind of encouraged to get out of our shell a little bit. Like, it took a while, but it was the first time in my life I was comfortable with praying spontaneously out loud without a script, without having memorized a prayer, right?
You poor Catholic.
Yeah. Like, so it ends up being this really good fit for both of us, where it's like, yes, we're going to, like, be deep in the Bible and ask the questions and talk about the culture and the historical context. And, we can talk about those clobber passages and what they mean and what they really don't mean. Right.
Yeah. And what did that mean in Greek?
Right. Right. And we could kind of encourage people to let go of the script a little bit and be a little bit more led by the Holy Spirit. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it ended up being a really good fit for both of us. It was a very diverse church.
Mm-hmm.
Even to the point where, Siobhan at one point joined the board. I sort of spontaneously volunteered for the worship team one Sunday when she wasn't even there, which, if you know me, I am naturally an introvert, right? So for me to, like, kind of raise my hand and go, oh, by the way, I could help out here, you have to really impress me for that to happen.
Yeah.
You know? And so we'd gotten like super involved in everything. And then the pandemic happened. And that's at least when I noticed that things got a little bit weird. I think other people that we've talked to since, have said that they've kind of noticed some things before that. But for me, it was, we got into the pandemic, everybody went home. We're doing the Zoom church like everybody else is. But even as things started to open back up, it was one excuse after another for why we couldn't get back in person.
Mm-hmm.
And even as an introvert, I'm like, something isn't right here. Like,
because now you did actually want to gather.
Right. Like the gathering is important,
It
right?
is.
Being in a room together is important. Like we did Zoom church because we had to, right?
Right.
But we're 2 years out and everybody's going, and it's, oh, well, we got to figure out the right configuration for the chairs in the room, or we got to make sure we have enough people to be greeters at the doors. Or I just want to try one more thing with the sound system first, because we got to keep the YouTube going for the people that don't want to come back in person yet. And what's our mask protocol going to be? And oh, do we ask people about vaccines or not? And it's just, oh, but the wiring in the right place, or the lighting is, it was just one thing after another. It's just like something's off,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't put my finger on what it is. And I think by this point, you had stepped back from the board. I don't even remember what the reasons were by this point. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. I don't know what the problem is, but I can't do it anymore. And I don't think it was a couple of Sundays, like a couple of weeks later,
Mm-hmm.
when another dear friend of ours from the church reached out and said,
Former
former board member, he's been on the podcast as well. So if some of this sounds a little familiar, it hit a lot of us in Columbus pretty hard.
Mm-hmm.
But reached out and was like, you're not going to believe this, but the pastor's doing a complete 180 and is going to, come out and say that, being gay is wrong. And, I've led everybody astray. He'd kind of been in the middle of this series about getting back to the fundamentals of the faith.
Mm-hmm.
And, going back to, I forget if it was the Apostles' Creed or one of the other ones of like, kind of going back, let's do this, sort of passage by passage or phrase by phrase and talk about, the fundamentals of the faith and getting back to all of this. But this friend, reaches out and lets us know that he's about to do this complete 180,
Mm-hmm.
even to the point if he had gone to this friend's house and said, hey, you got to leave your husband and you don't even need to bother getting a divorce because the marriage isn't real.
Mm-hmm.
And mind you, this was a husband who had a lot of health issues, who had been taken care of. They had taken in a niece who had also been through a lot of things. So the idea that even if you have something against gay marriage, that you would walk into a stable home and say, hey, abandon these people in some of their deepest, darkest times of need
Mm-hmm.
because your gay marriage isn't right, it's just absurd, right? And it just took me right back to, here we go again, organized religion, where two or more gathered, this is what we end up with. And so that hurt, and that hurt deeply. And I had to take some time to really work through that and go, I'm not going to let this man, this human being, take my faith away from me. Like, he may have destroyed the church,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because as far as I could tell, like after that Sunday, just everybody walked away. And there was no congregation left for him to even record, or have on Zoom. But I really had to spend some deep time in praise and worship and prayer and decide for myself that I was not going to let a human being take my faith away, even if it felt like he had corrupted the church. And looking back on it, I realized, and it's interesting because I've seen the same thing as an attorney who talks to nonprofits, including churches. He had set everything up so that he was the only person in charge.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody could really evaluate him. Nobody in the congregation was in a position to say, hey, you're not doing a great job of leading. You're not the right fit as the pastor right now. Let's bring in somebody else. Everything was just sort of like, here's what I'm doing and where I'm taking the church, and everybody else is just going to rubber stamp that.
Mm-hmm.
And as an attorney, like who's talked to, churches and nonprofits, I've seen the exact same thing play out with these pastors who are like, having a board of directors isn't biblical. Nobody, like, I've got to be the head of the church. Nobody should be telling the pastor what to do. Don't worry about the decisions that I make. Don't question me or second guess and everything. And problems like this come up, whether it's over money, over leadership, over, what do we believe as a congregation? I see it unfortunately all too often. And that common denominator is, well, I'm the pastor, that makes me the head honcho. I don't answer to anybody but God himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which isn't, and don't let me speak for the actual biblical scholar in the room, Ben, Reverend
Hardly a
Dr. Ben,
biblical scholar, but thank you.
to my much more than I, but to my knowledge, that's not at all what being a pastor is. Pastor is not about the power or being in charge or not being questioned. It's about being a servant leader. And I think there was one of the things we learned is there's many different things to being pastoral, right? Or being a pastor. And there's many different parts of that, but none of those is that I'm in charge not to be questioned. It really is, I am leading through servants or through serving this congregation.
Well, and the irony is I can remember the Sundays where he would talk about, everybody's got their spiritual gifts, right? And so let's make sure everybody is using their particular gifts, right? And so to suddenly, have this sort of, not suddenly, but I guess it was there all along, but just to have this attitude of like, oh, no, only the pastor is in charge of anything, right? I mean, dictating what the songs were going to be on Sundays to, oh, I don't like that song, like, let's not do that one, let's change it up, let's, we got to get back to, more traditional songs, right? Or it's just a lot of like weird controlling things that I didn't notice or pay attention to at the time, that in hindsight, it was just like, okay, the red flags were there. But at the same time, like, don't get me wrong, in that particular time and space before everything, got burned in flames, right? It was what I needed, and it let me grow spiritually in a way that I don't know that I could have done anywhere else, right? Like I said, I mean, that was the place where I learned, like, prayer doesn't have to be something that the church handed you and you memorized and then or read off of a piece of paper, right? I got more into Bible study, and not just like as a kid, I had my pocket, New Testament with Psalms and Proverbs and the concordance in the back. You're 14 and you're like, well, I'm angry. Let me find a verse about that, right?
Yep.
So, keeping a prayer journal, like leading in worship, being comfortable with raising hands in church, right? Like there were a lot of good things that came out of it, a lot of good habits that I still have to this day. But, to see one person say that, despite all the good that's come of that, despite seeing people's faith grow, despite seeing them, gain these spiritual gifts, I am going to decide of my own accord to burn it all down to the ground.
Yeah.
And, to your point about the pastor not being the head honcho, what comes to me is, the stories in, Matthew and probably the rest of the New Testament of like, you've got to remove the log from your own eye before you worry about the speck in somebody else's. I think that there's a very biblical concept for, even as a pastor, you've got to be open to, hey, you're not doing something right. We're going to come to you one-on-one and try to address this. And then if we can't, maybe we'll take it to a larger group within the church, right? But to say that you're completely above correction or being told, hey, this isn't right, that's insane.
Yeah.
That's insane.
What's kind of interesting is that as I'm listening, of the traditions that we all three were raised in, they all three have patterns. Well, actually, no, I'm sorry, two traditions. I'm used to saying three traditions. Two traditions, because I was raised Roman Catholic as well.
Yes.
But both traditions have a pattern of, to some degree, almost deifying the pastor. You don't question the pastor.
Yes.
In the case of the Roman Catholic Church, as you've said, Shay, we saw it with the clergy abuse scandals. It may not have been just one priest, but it was the next step up. It was the bishop who was covering things up, or the cardinal, or whoever.
Right.
Actually, thinking about the different traditions we've been in, you can actually probably make an argument, although this is strange to say, that the Southern Baptists may sometimes have better accountability than the Catholics and Pentecostals, to a very small degree, perhaps. I feel weird saying that because the Southern Baptists have their own problems as well. But I definitely remember that from growing up Catholic. We were always taught you never say something bad about a priest. So what does that say if the priest is molesting you? You never hit a priest. You never cause any bad thing to happen to a priest. Those were all held up, at least in my upbringing, as mortal sins, like one-way straight ticket to hell. Um,
Oh
so
my.
what do you do with that then?
Well,
I
not
mean, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
well, and not even just that. I mean, the whole Catholic idea around confession and that,
Exactly.
you can't just like confess privately, you can't just confess in prayer to God, right? You can't even just go confess like, oh, hey, I hurt that person, I'm going to go apologize to them, right? It has to go through the priest, right? You got to do the sacrament of confession. There has to be that intermediary there. And that was one of the things that, as I started to read and study more on my own, it was one of the things that I started to question of like, well, do we, given everything you read in the Gospels, like, why do we need this sort of human intermediary? Where does that idea even come from? And what does that mean to be confessing to a human intermediary that's also, covering up all these horrific things that we're reading about in the news? Um, and then the weird pressure as a child of like, you making your first confession, you've got to come up with something to say. And it's like, what do you say as like an 8-year-old kid? Like the same thing every eight. Oh, me and my siblings don't get along. I yelled at my sister. I stole a piece of candy, right? Like, I mean, it's a very weird kind of, oh, people are bad. They're born bad. They're very, wrong, and you got to make yourself right with God. That again, the more I read and study for myself, the more I kind of like, I'm not really sure where that came from.
Well, no matter where it came from, it's not something that sits right in your spirit.
Yeah,
It
it doesn't
sounds
sit
like.
right in my
Yeah.
spirit. I'm not sure. I'm not convinced at all that it's very healthy for children. Um, but again, right? Like I was raised in the church, right? So like despite all of those things that I did not keep, right? The fact that I was raised in the church, the fact that my mom had gospel music playing all the time, right? Especially on Sundays, right? All of those things still resonated, right? So there was a good base, a good foundation there. It's just if you know me, I'm the kind of person that's going to question everything.
So the Catholic faith was never going to work for you because you had too many questions that need to be answered.
Way too many questions. I was going to do way too much reading on my own. Like the math isn't matting, we're carrying the one, it's not adding up. Like something, come on, work with me here.
Yeah. Yeah. Goodness.
So Shay, I want to go back to something you said pretty much at the very beginning of everything you just said. And I'm curious because just like in Pentecostal world and Baptist world and whatever else, in Catholic world, there are different experiences of the Catholic Church based on where we grew up, what types of communities our churches were in. So I remember that you said, when talking about your grandmother's church, and I think that was your dad's side of the family.
Yeah.
You put the adjective before it as saying it was a Black Southern Baptist church. What was your experience? What was the community like of your Catholic church? Because I know from my own experience that Catholic churches, though they're pretty much all, the stereotype is the white Catholic church that kind of mirrors some sort of European model. But there are Catholic churches that have a decidedly Black flavor to them, to Asian, Latino, etc. What was your Catholic church like growing up?
So that's an interesting question because I've learned that every city of any size, and again, right, Shreveport was not huge, has kind of an historically Black Catholic church, harkening back to, the days of segregation, right? People say that, Sunday morning is the most segregated time in America to this day. And I think that that's still true in a lot of ways. So we attended, the Black Catholic Church in Shreveport. That was interesting because they had sort of like the 8 o'clock mass would be more traditional, more hymns, right? And then the 10 o'clock mass would be like, okay, we can let the piano player go a little loose here and play a little more gospel, right? Which my mom definitely preferred. I think that's where my kind of love of worship music still comes from. Is like, if nothing else, like we at least had the music to kind of lift things up, even if the homily from the priest was a little dry. Let's try to keep our eyes open, right?
And then me being Pentecostal, I didn't know that Black Catholics listen to gospel. So I just thought, I didn't know. So to me, gospel is a very Protestant thing and not a Catholic thing. And so the idea that you are a Black Catholic listening to gospel makes sense now. But, being raised Protestant, I never would have considered, well, first finding out that there was a Black Catholic church. I found that out about 25 years ago. I know that now. But then also that Black Catholics listen to gospel music. That was also part of that.
To this day, I think my favorite gospel song is Order My Steps.
Mm-hmm.
Like that one's always just been ingrained in my brain. I just heard it so much growing up. And we had a really talented piano. Like I will never remember her name. I can't even picture her face. But I just remember we had a very, very talented piano player. And when she would play and sing that song, like you're just, yeah, that did it every time.
Yeah.
Now, who knew what the pastor was going to do after that or the priest was going to do after that? We did have, for the most part, a Black priest, and I don't know how that happened or we looked up that way because, the Catholic Church assigns priests to different churches. But there would be times where you'd have a visiting priest and, wow, I don't know what they do in the priesthood. It feels like, and I'm a little dumbstruck by the fact that public speaking is not like a mandatory part of seminary.
Okay.
Because we had some, especially some of the visiting priests that would come in, and it wasn't always the white ones. I mean, sometimes we'd have Black visiting priests too, and it was just like, you might as well be making paint dry. Like you just have no public speaking ability whatsoever. And I say this as somebody who grew up doing like speech and debate, mock trial, right? Like I'm a lawyer, like that just kind of comes naturally to me. There were definitely some very dry Sundays where the only thing that saved it was, okay, we went to 10 o'clock mass for the music.
Yep. Totally.
Oh, but
I actually think, and if there are any Catholics, particularly folks who are still attending Catholic churches out there who are listening, I apologize. But I really think that when folks go to graduate level seminary for the Roman Catholic Church, at some point, I don't know if it's a class, I don't know if it's just the culture, but at some point they identify the people who have really good preaching ability and they like work it out of them. Because I remember meeting seminarians growing up who were just these wonderfully charismatic individuals, and then they would be ordained, and all of a sudden their sermons would go from somewhat exciting, I mean, by Catholic standards, to so godforsakenly dry. And I literally mean godforsaken.
Which is weird, right? Because then I go to church on, the summers with Granny, and that's not at all what you hear, right?
You're not going to fall asleep.
Not going to fall asleep at all,
No.
right? So it's just a very different experience. But then, this church we were going to in Columbus, it was more of a mixed, diverse crowd, which originally we really liked. But it got me more into the contemporary Christian music because that was more of what we would play. So, the Bethel and the elevation worship and things like that, which some of it, not all of it, but a lot of it I still listen to today. And just being a guitar player just kind of like fits, you don't hear a lot of guitar in gospel music. So it's weird just kind of having all those different experiences, but music for me has been the kind of the steady through line. Okay, well, if nothing else, we've got that. So Siobhan gets mad because she'll get in my car and sometimes I'll have, gospel or CCM on, and she's just like, well, but this is not at all like, I wasn't even in this headspace. What are you doing?
It's not that I get mad. It's that I am a very compartmentalized person. Maritza has very diverse musical interests. Generally, Maritza is my DJ. I trust Maritza's music choosing power almost all the time, except when it is Friday night. We're heading out to go to happy hour with our friends, and all of a sudden elevation worship comes on. And it's just a weird thing. It's just kind of jarring. Like, oh, this was not, or, we were listening to Lizzo, and then the next song is, from Hillsong or something, right? Like that is...
I have a bad habit of playing my music on shuffle. Maybe not a bad habit, but that is my get in the car, hit shuffle, right? Whatever pops up, pops up.
Yeah.
But she did finally convince me to maybe separate these playlists out by genre.
Maybe a little bit. Maybe we go sing about Jesus when we're in that headspace, right? And we don't want to jump from Cardi B to the Lord and Savior. That just
I'm totally for that. I have totally been playing in public, I might add, music, one of my playlists, and it jumps from Nicki Minaj to Hillsong, and it's just like, oh yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. Now I can get there gradually. Now, if you give me 4 or 5 songs, I can get there. Like it's like 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. Oh yeah, I can get you from one song to the other. I just need a path. It's the jarringness of the jump.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
And also teasing you and giving you a hard time.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
That's part of marriage, right?
It is. It is.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure this comment's going to go anywhere because I want to jump to something else you said. But I found it very interesting when you talked about, or when Siobhan talked about your tattoo, and you talked about the verse that's with it. I Googled it real quick, or I pulled it up on my online Bible, and you quoted it from the King James Version, which has Proverbs 3:6 says, "He shall direct my paths." Because my online Bible is set up for the New Revised Updated Version, the like very academic version that I tend to use. I thought you were going to go somewhere completely different because that verse or that snippet is rendered in the NRSV UE as "He will make straight your paths." I really thought there was going to be a whole nother discussion there. I also had in my mind, oh God, do they have on their arm "He will make straight their paths" or something? And then,
Yeah.
I mean,
that would be hilarious.
That would be weird.
Yeah.
No, I don't think God is running around trying to make people straight.
agreed.
I memorized it from a pretty young age in the King James Version, which is weird because I don't do a lot in the King James anymore. Like, I think my default on my Bible app is the New Living Translation. But I do a lot of like self-study, so I need to get an NRSVU just to compare.
And I'm King James all the way. So for 12 years, we only could use the King James Version of the Bible in my private Christian school. And so for 12 years, I memorized Bible passages from the King James Version. So now,
I do keep a New King James Version. So sometimes you want more of the poetic flair, but you still want it to be readable.
Okay.
And so I do like the New King James Version for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I've got an ESV study Bible as well, and that's probably the most conservative one I've ever read.
And those are difficult for me, actually. It is difficult for me to read scripture that is not in the King James version, just because it's so deeply instilled in my head that I'm going to say thee and thou when I am speaking biblical passages. And I think I'm having an epiphany. And this is a strange epiphany. I think this is why I like Victorian England so much. I think because I literally grew up memorizing passages from the King James Version of the Bible saying thee and thou all the time. Maybe this is why I'm an Anglophile and I love Victorian and Regency England.
Because that language makes sense to me.
Because that language makes sense to me and I spent so much time steeped in that language.
Well, and see, this is another odd part about like our marriage and our faith journeys. Like you grew up memorizing Bible passages.
Yes.
I did not. Like I don't even think we brought our Bibles to church with us, to a Catholic mass with us, right? Like you pulled out the little guidebook, you flipped to the readings, right? The hymn lyrics are right there, right?
My Bible was my textbook. Bible was the first class of every day. It was in my book bag. Well, because actually I had a church Bible and a school Bible. So you couldn't just have one Bible because you had to have a school Bible that you kept at school and then you had a church Bible. So even as a child growing up, I had more than one Bible.
Yeah, and I don't remember when I started to get them. I mean, I remember the little pocket, like I said, New Testament with Psalms and Proverbs. I'm sure I got one at some point as a teenager just because I remember getting to the point where Granny was like, what do you mean you didn't bring your Bible to church? Like, you're old enough to know better, right?
Yes.
And I don't remember what translation that would have been. But yeah, I mean, now that I've gone, electronic, I keep a few different translations and sometimes I flip between them just to see those differences. But I had forgotten about, the whole "make straight thy paths," which is an interesting translation. I don't know academically kind of like where that comes from, but I think because "order my steps" is such like seared into my brain, like, kind of directing your path makes sense to me. And the idea of like making your path straight, I think could be open to some misinterpretation of like, oh, things will be nice and smooth and easy. And I'm like, that's not promised anywhere.
Oh,
that
no.
I'm confident in.
A straight path can still go over a mountain.
Okay. Like it is straight.
Okay.
Over the cliff.
See, I don't know that passage or anything about it in it probably would have been Proverbs or probably would have been Hebrew originally, but I do wonder where we get make straight versus direct or order. I mean, those are, in English at least, those
Yeah.
are not the same concept.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it also, where are we? How are we? What's the translation journey that got us to one of those? I mean, the King James is wonderful. The King James is a it's like the success of the English language. Is the King
Right.
James version.
Yeah.
It would be like taking Shakespeare and rendering it into something equivalent to the NRSV. The NRSV is not
Right.
poetic. I mean, sometimes it just sucks. But it's more
Okay.
academic. It's more in line with what is actually going on here. As a translation, the King James version is crap, basically. But
Right. Right.
again, it's a success of the English language, and it was commissioned by someone who is well known to have been gay. So I like that too.
I do like that now, and it's hilarious to me just how adamant my very Christian Nazarene Christian school was about using a translation by a gay man, or that was authorized by a gay man, and it's hilarious.
So Shay, I wanted, there's one last thing I wanted to kind of ask you about, and it's actually something you said way at the beginning of our recording. You said I wrote it down as, I've never let people take that, and I think that was faith, or your
Right.
faith away from you. And it's something we've heard time and again from our guests on this podcast, that whether it be because of the church itself, if it be because of homophobia, transphobia, whatever, queer people of faith, queer Christians have not let people take away their faith. And I'm just wondering if there's anything else you wanted to add to that or comment on from your journey.
It's interesting that so many people have said, something so similar. And I think it just speaks to just how deep faith runs in queer Christians, right? I mean, it is something that we have had to fight hard for, right? And really wrestle with, not just to have, and it's not even about being accepted by others or being accepted by a particular church community, but having to wrestle with that faith and who God is and what our relationship with Him is, what that relationship looks like. What does it mean to have a church home or to not have a church home? What kind of music is acceptable or not acceptable to listen to? The way that I have to preview songs, especially if it's like a live recording of a song, and it's like, oh, or is this artist going to ad lib and say something out of pocket, right? Very recently, with the news of Charlie Kirk and that whole political spectacle of a funeral, and seeing the number of worship artists that I listened to that decided to go be headliners at this thing, it's just like, whew, okay, so I'm not gonna let that steal my faith, but what does that mean for my iTunes playlist, right?
Yeah.
But I think it just goes to show the depth of faith that queer Christians have, and I think it's something that the broader church tends to overlook while getting so hung up on, but there's these 6 passages I want to interpret to mean that gay is wrong, right? And it's like you're completely missing the forest for the trees. It's like I was telling, I think one of my cousins one day as we were having a conversation, like, even if I give you that you truly believe that being gay is a sin, like even if I concede that, and that you are deeply, that is a deeply held belief for you, you can't reconcile those clobber passages. You do have to reconcile that with, okay, but we all sin and fall short of the glory of God. And Jesus came to save the sinners. He came to save the lost, right? So none of us have it completely together. And so for that to be the thing that you get completely hung up on and completely miss just how deep our faith is because of the way that we've had to wrestle with it, yeah, you're missing the forest for the trees here. You're getting stuck on 1 or 2 verses instead of reading whole chapters and whole books and the entire library that we call the Bible, right? And putting things in context, right? If you haven't had to wrestle with your faith in that way, and you're just like, well, my life is all hunky dory because I'm middle class and I'm straight and I'm married, and yeah, there's some sins, but mine don't count, right? Mm-hmm. But yours, I'm going to beat you over the head with. yeah, you really got to sit back and reevaluate that. What does your faith really mean to you if it's that easy,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
right? If all it teaches you about the world is, don't be the little kid that, snuck an extra piece of candy. Don't be mean to your siblings. If that's all you took from the entirety of the Gospels, let alone the entire book of the Bible, yeah, that's paper thin to me.
Yeah, yeah. And you said it's something else earlier. You said I just didn't believe God was that petty.
Right.
And I think I think I came to a very similar conclusion when I was wrestling with God and trying to understand the character of God. And I said, no, actually, I don't think that's God's character. I don't think that God hates me. I don't think that God created me just to hate me. Again, I don't think God's that petty. I don't think God is petty at all. And I think that queer people have kind of come to that conclusion, like that the God we serve is not a petty God, is not a small God, is not a God that creates things just to hate them or to destroy them. Our God's character is that of love and inclusion and empathy and wanting us to have one another as well as Him, because when we have one another, that is the essence, right? That is Him in the midst of us. So
And wanting to be in a relationship with us despite any flaws or imperfections,
that
right?
part.
Like it's interesting to me that, God gave us free will, right? He had to have known that we were going to mess up and make mistakes and learn along the way,
Of course.
right? He intentionally did not want us to just be puppets that he would just play around with on strings. We're not, you're a little kid, you've got your Barbie dolls or GI Joes and you just control everything. Like that's not who God is. That's not the relationship that he wants to have with us. And I remember as I was doing Bible study, and I don't remember what book or commentary this came out of, but I came across this idea that a God small enough to understand is not big enough to worship.
Amen.
And I think that so often the church wants to, we've got all the answers, we know what it is, and we need to play God ourselves and fix everything and everybody to be, our image of what the faith is supposed to be. So don't ask that question. Don't commit this sin. Let's ignore the fact that the pastor's cheating on his wife. Let's, and trying to put God into this little tiny box that we feel like we can control instead of saying, okay, maybe you don't know why God made gay people, but he did tell you to love your neighbor. So
There you go.
end of story.
Easy.
And it really is that easy.
Yeah.
You may not understand it, but it is that easy.
Yeah.
If you're willing to accept some of that mystery.
Yeah. Okay, here's a mystery. Last question.
Okay.
Help us solve this mystery. What are you looking for in a church? I mean, given all of these experiences that you've had,
That is a good question.
given, what you know about so many different denominations and
Yeah.
ways and styles of worship, given what you know about what it means to be gathered with other people,
Yeah.
what is it that you are looking for in a church, or are you looking for a church?
As we've talked, I mean, we haven't quite gotten to the point of, yes, let us affirmatively get up Sunday and go check out some churches and kind of do the whole church shopping thing.
Mhm.
I think we will get there. I don't want to say the wounds of the last church are still fresh, but they're certainly still there. And it certainly makes you put your guard up and go, this was a person who said that they had done the work and they were open and affirming, and then they apparently managed to undo all of that work very quickly, right? So it does make you a little bit leery. But I think when we get to that point, like I said, worship music, whether it's gospel or CCM, that's been a clear through line throughout my life. I mean, I think a strong worship team, it's one thing I do miss is playing on the worship team. So that one definitely, I think, we're both at a point where I don't want to call it academic, but definitely that deep seated, we're going to get deep into the word here, right? We're going to go and study it and really talk about what it means and wrestle with it. And like I said, we're not here to have all the answers, right? Sometimes it's just asking the questions, but not, sometimes I think what we see out of some churches that are very progressive is this sort of like, well, we don't necessarily need the Bible on Sunday. We just talk about this really cool concept or idea, right? We're just gonna, borrow a little bit from this and that, things like that. It's like, if that's what you're into, that's what you're into. But again, having grown up the way that I did, I've got to have that.
Yep.
So I think those two things, and then I think, the fellowship piece of it, I think that is important. It's just, even now, it's like, yeah, sometimes I listen to something on YouTube in the car, but I can't go back to YouTube or Zoom church. Um, Even as an introvert, there is something about actually having relationships with people and gathering together on a Sunday, that's important. And I don't think I could go back to anything nearly as quiet as a Catholic church. Um,
That
Doesn't
was
necessarily want to go like, full Kojic, running down the aisles either, but there's a little part of Catholic me that's just like, I mean, that's not couth. Come on, we don't need to run down the aisles. Like, you're gonna hurt somebody doing that, right? But to each their own, right? I mean, for some people that is their faith, and I say that jokingly. I don't mean that disparagingly at all, but definitely something not as Catholic, but a little more lively and upbeat. We can let the Holy Spirit veer us off script a bit, I guess.
love it.
What can I say? Like
favorite part of
I
service.
keep saying to Siobhan, there's this little church in Columbus called Blue Ocean Faith Columbus. Not sure y'all have heard about it, or the pastor. I mean, come on. Anyway,
And that's just how, and that is literally just how, I wouldn't even say stubborn, but like just how much of we have to make up our mind to do something, right? Like we have to sit with it and go, really? And we really? And then one day we'll decide. And but it's
It's
kind
gonna
of,
surprise you one day.
yeah, it's a long runway,
Fair enough.
but eventually
Fair
we'll
enough.
get there. Yeah. Oh, all right. Ben, I think this has been an amazing time talking
It
with
has.
Shay. Did you get to know Shay a little bit better
Definitely.
without my interference?
I'm a pretty open book.
You are. Well, let's jump into our segments. Our first segment is the query of the day. Yes, that is a pun. This is your opportunity as a listener to chime in. Let us know what you're thinking as we ask our query of the day. Shay mentioned that they joined the worship band and that they play the guitar and the bass. So our query of the day is, do you play an instrument, and have you played in a worship band? I have never played in a worship band. My instrument in the worship band is my voice. It is a choir, not a solo voice. And then my hands. I can clap on beat. And
The 2 and 4, right? Not the 1 and 3.
right, that's from this weekend. Anyway,
That's also from like black church versus white church.
that is also true. And a tambourine. I will say that our former pastor did not allow tambourines in the church. And well, because he didn't trust anyone to play it correctly, because he was very exact. He was also a musician and very exacting. So I think that when we do get back into the church, I'm getting a tambourine, and B, my instrument of choice will just be my voice. I don't have any any wonderful instruments that I can play. Shay, what can you play for the worship band?
So I can play guitar and bass. I cannot sing. I tell everyone, if God wanted us all to sing, He'd have blessed us all with the ability to hit the notes. And He did not. So not everyone in the church needs to sing along.
Okay.
That is completely unnecessary and slightly offensive to the Holy Spirit.
You sing with your guitar.
Okay, you could call it that, right? We will make a joyful noise with the guitar,
There you
but
go.
I don't need to sing out the lyrics out loud unless it is very much under my breath and under everyone else.
There you go.
Yeah, definitely do not need to sing. But I think my first instrument, besides the recorder that they handed everybody, which is very offensive to parents now that I think about it, when I tried out for the band in middle school, having childhood asthma, they kind of had lined up the instruments. And so the first room was the flutes, right? Like kind of the easiest one to blow into. And I got to that section. They were like, great, stop here. You're not going any further. So starting with the flute, that didn't last very long just because nobody can actually hear the flutes in the band. And it felt very pointless.
But also you're quiet anyway. So that was also very...
I know, but I also went to this very academic school that didn't have a football team or a marching band. So it's just like, well,
Yes.
what's the point of being in the band?
Right. Ben, were you in the band?
So I was not in the band because I went to 13 years of Catholic education at schools that were too small to have bands. But I grew up.
Yeah.
I studied the violin briefly, clarinet for a while. But I'm like you, Siobhan. I always was in the choir. And I was in the adult choir at our church from age 10 on. Sang in like the liturgical choir for my college. So yeah, I was always in the choir, and that was definitely not praise and worship band. That was definitely hardcore Roman Catholic or Anglican hymns.
Oh, wow. Wow, that sounds intense. Okay. Well, let us know. Jump in there in the comments on Instagram. Let us know if you were in the worship band, if you were in the choir, maybe you were in the school band. Shout out to HU again. Did we even see the band this past weekend?
I saw pictures, but I missed them coming up on the yard.
We did. Okay, but shout out to Howard University's band. Let us know. Were you in a college band, a high school band? How are you raising a joyful noise to the Lord? Ben, any other segments today?
Yes. So our segment in queer Christian history, and I just want to put that out there again. If you have some good moments in queer Christian history, please send them my way. I'm starting to run out of good, positive moments and moments that aren't just like, some awful thing happened to queer Christians at some point in history. But today I want to talk about something that actually I just learned about relatively recently, and that is a group that was called the Council on Religion and the Homosexual. It was founded in San Francisco in 1964, so this is 5 years before the Stonewall riots. And it lasted into the 1970s before it just kind of more or less fizzled out. But they put together some really interesting academic and religious spaces, including in 1968, they sponsored their first symposium on, and with apologies for the dated language, on the lifestyle of the homosexual, is what it was called.
Oh, my.
It seems to have been put together mostly by heterosexual clergy. Obviously, in 1964, 1965, the amount of openly LGBTQ clergy would have been almost microscopic, if at all. But still, an organization of pastors, different types of clergy who got together to, in a positive way, talk about what it meant to be LGBTQ and Christian, and LGBTQ and religious. And now, of course, this is in San Francisco. It's in a much larger city, a city that's well known, especially at that time, for members of the queer community. But still, one of these almost forgotten to history, quite frankly, spaces where not only, as we often say here, that we've always been here and we've always been here in the church, but where people were actively organizing, agitating, creating spaces, much like we try to do here at Love Boldly.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing, Ben. All right, y'all. That brings us to the end of another amazing episode. We want to thank Shay for being here, joining us in your own office. You had to come so far. Is there any?
Thanks for letting me crash my office.
You're so welcome. Is there anything that you would like to promote? Any of the nonprofits? Anything you want to talk about?
You can find me on Instagram, Shay the Serial Hobbyist. All the law firm stuff is MSN Law Office. Yeah.
All right. Good stuff. Yeah. All right. And then you know that you can find us at Coming Out Christian on Instagram. You can find Love Boldly at loveboldly.net and Love Boldly on Instagram. Is it Love Boldly on Instagram, Ben?
Yes, at Love Boldly.
Yes. Yeah, okay, at Love Boldly on Instagram. Remember to remember to subscribe, share. Sharing is caring. We're coming up on the sharing, the giving season, the season of thanks. So please, if you like this episode, like it, subscribe it, share it with a friend. And of course, join us back here next Sunday for another episode of Coming Out Christian.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We hope this conversation encouraged you, challenged you, and maybe just helped you feel a little less alone on your journey. If this podcast has been meaningful to you, would you consider supporting the work of Love Boldly? Love Boldly's mission is to create spaces where LGBTQIA+ people can flourish in Christianity, and your donation helps make conversations like this one possible. You can give at www.loveboldly.net/donate. That's www.loveboldly.net/donate. Want to stay connected with the podcast? Follow us on Instagram at comingoutchristian_podcast for updates, resources, and community. Until next time, remember that you can be queer and Christian and queer.